Hi, I'm Master Sergeant Jared Denton. I'm a course content developer with the Secretary of the Air Force Public Affairs. And I want to thank you for tuning in to this presentation on World War Web, which is all about social media and how it's playing into the information environment and into information warfare. So, without further ado, let's kind of jump right in and explore what World War Web actually means. I want to start off by kind of highlighting what the information environment looks like. So, right here, you see a visual representation of the hashtag Syrian gas attack when there was an attack in Syria a few years ago. And if you notice, you have clusters of dots on here that kind of form larger areas. Those clusters are actually individual tweets or statuses that have that hashtag Syrian gas attack. This entire web linked back to the factual information surrounding this event. Now, the problem with that is that's not the only thing that occupies the information environment, which is digital and thus open to anybody who wants to put any information out there. So what you have next is actually a case of disinformation right here, where it says Syria hoax. So this is the competitive hashtag on here that pushed a disinformation campaign that was saying this event didn't happen, it's not real, it's being blown out of proportion. And as you can see, disinformation travels a lot farther and a lot faster than factual information. It almost looks like a bomb going off in the information environment. And that's kind of a real difference than how we looked at communication in the past. Traditionally, we would see this kind of thing as, okay, well, we put out a factual message and people are going to take it in because that's how they align themselves. They'll listen to us because we're a trusted organization. We're an official organization, and that's not how it works anymore. Disinformation literally floods an information environment and pushes and pushes and pushes, trying to shift a narrative to whatever their goal, whatever their purpose is going to be. So if you look at that, disinformation, as we know it, tracks back to Russia. Other countries are out there doing it, especially now more than ever. But Russia has really been doing this for about a century. They have a model for disinformation that keeps working against us. And it's kind of important to note that the quote here by Vladimir Putin, where he says he's the wealthiest man in the world because he collects emotions, is at the core of disinformation. Disinformation leverages an emotional state that it creates in someone and then encourages that person to share that false narrative or really align themselves to it. So when we look at disinformation, we want to consider that it's not a problem that is static or stagnant even. Since 2017 to 2019, we've seen a 150% increase in the number of countries engaging in social media manipulation. It's kind of an undiscovered country when it comes to information. You have all of the information in the world going out there at a rapid pace. And so, of course, you're going to have truthful narratives, but you're also going to have a flood of false narratives, of fake information that's coming out. Just in the case of Russia, there's been projects that have been tracking false Russian narratives. And since this EU versus disinformation site where this information came from, since it started up about 5 years ago, they have tracked 9,129 pro-Kremlin disinformation cases. And in 2016 alone, the IRA, Internet Research Agency, which is set up in Russia, was responsible for about 62,000 Facebook posts, 116,000 Instagram posts, and 10.4 million tweets. And that's in 2016. In 2020, we've been seeing even larger numbers with that. So when you think about an information environment like social media or like a digital space where the possibilities are endless, you can legitimately flood that environment with false narratives, with disinformation, and that'll erode a narrative. And Russia does that in three ways. Not only Russia, but China, Iran, they're all kind of copying this framework. So you see that Russia will put out initially, and we'll start on the right here, they'll put out bots. Bots, especially today, are AIs. They're artificial intelligence, or they're machines that are programmed to feed a certain line or feed a narrative into a social media platform. The idea of that is they saturate that information environment. They make it so that people can't actually get information, get truthful information, because the actual space that they occupy is saturated with these false narratives. Going to the left, you have trolls. Those are people who are sowing discord on social media sites. You see them a lot in the comments on stories that go up on news sites, or content that gets posted that has a lot of participation or a lot of engagement in that. You have trolls that jump in, they sow discord, or they put something negative out, and then they leave. They move on to the next one. Finally, you have sock puppets, and sock puppets pretend to be other people. So it's almost like a catfishing scheme for disinformation. They pretend to be a whole different person, and they construct a complete false narrative along the views that they're aligned to, or they're supposed to be aligned to. And the ultimate goal of that is to sow discord, is to sow confusion, is to make people question their own reality, which leads to tangible actions. We're seeing that now. So when you're looking at those kinds of things with disinformation, it's a very well constructed and very complicated kind of mainframe on there. And so what Russia is actually doing in the way of translating disinformation into the hands of consumers, which we're the consumers, the American people, people on social media all over the world, we are the consumers of information. Now, whether that's factual or false depends on where it originates from or how it's spun. So the initial message starts out with Russian leadership, or the country that's actually promoting this disinformation. It starts with their leadership. And then it goes into the organs and proxies, which that's your internet research agency. And those proxies take that message from the organ of the IRA. And the proxies are like RT. RT is a perfect example of a proxy on there. They will take a narrative from the IRA and weave an entire story around it. And the crux of it is disinformation requires a kernel of truth to be successful. So 80% or so of content on RT is factual, give or take a certain percentage point or two. But 80% is factual. It's that 20% that's false that people can't tell the difference of. So if they can get people trusting that 80%, then they'll hang on for that 20 and amplify it. And then that gets into the next link in this disinformation chain, which is amplification. It puts a narrative out on its organs and its proxies, and then it uses bots, trolls, sock puppets, and regular people to amplify that message. You'll see it on your own personal timelines, people who are sharing pro-Kremlin content, and they may not even know that it is, but it aligns with an emotional state that they have, and it reverberates in this echo chamber that they have in their lives. And so finally, after it's amplified, it reaches us. And once it goes through that entire chain, you have what seemingly looks credible from a news site, say RT, amplified out through different agencies and different people. And some of them may be your friends. Some of them may be people you trust. And so you see it and it's, oh, well, if they trust it, maybe I should trust it as well. So all of that information is coming at a rapid pace. If you see how it works on Facebook or Twitter or any of the other social media platforms out there, you see that it is constantly refreshing. It's constantly changing. You can't see the same content usually twice on a social media platform. It's very difficult to. So that kind of leads into the next step, which is what are the active measures that a country like Russia is doing with those false narratives, with disinformation. And you see that some of these are overt. Some of them take the themes that are actually facts, and then they copy them with a little bit of a twist. They shape them. That was noticed in a couple of accounts of people who worked for the IRA who then moved on to do other things and told their story. They said that they would get assignments to write news stories where all they were doing was changing 1 or 2 words, but those 1 or 2 words shifted the entire tone of the actual story. And so one of the things too that they bring up is once they're shaping these narratives and sowing this discord, they want uncertainty. They want people to be unsure of what is real or false, because at the end of the day, Russia, as an example, is not trying to dictate a certain agenda. They're trying to sow discord. They're trying to create confusion, because if the United States is confused, if the United States doesn't know how fact from fiction, then Russia is able to advance its own internal and external objectives a lot more effectively. And that gets down into shaping the narratives. If they are sowing confusion, sowing discord, they're allowing a narrative to be shaped around a false premise. It kind of goes into understanding the makeup and the dynamic of fake news. And there's actually 7 commandments of fake news that are kind of out there. So in order for something to be a successful version of fake news, they have to actually, the originators of it have to look for cracks and social divisions. They have to have a place where the fake news can kind of insert itself like a weed. And then the next step that they do is they create a big, bold lie that's just so outrageous, it has to be true. Now, that lie has to wrap around the 3rd commandment, which is having a kernel of truth. There has to be a little part of it that is actually true, that people who will look a little deeper than the headline, so to speak, will be able to latch onto and say, no, this is true, so the entire thing must be true. That's how you get a lot of conspiracy theories kind of spinning wild that have started out as disinformation or even misinformation, incorrect information. The fourth step is for fake news generators to conceal their hand. So they make it appear that story came from somewhere else. So it may not track back to something like RT. It might track back to another news agency or a pseudonym for a news agency that people think that they can trust because it looks maybe like BBC or it looks like NBC, things like that. So they kind of conceal where it originally came from. One of the greatest tricks of Russian disinformation is the actual word disinformation. It was disinformatia, and one of the first disinformation campaigns was to convince the world that wasn't a Russian term. It wasn't originated in Russia. So they started telling people that it was French. So this has been going on for a very long time. The 5th commandment comes down when you get into that amplification part of the chain. You have to find what is called a useful idiot. And that useful idiot will amplify that message to a target audience. Now, Russia and other countries have been doing this with bots, trolls, and sock puppets, but it's not the same as actually having a real human being take that message and say, I believe this, and I'm going to put all of my trust behind it and share it on a digital platform. Once they have that, then it starts to take on a life of its own. And then all they need to do is go to the 6th commandment of it, which is to deny the truth. Even if they're called out, even if this is fake, even if this is proven as a conspiracy theory, they will continue to deny it. And then what they will do is they will target truth seekers. And they will say, well, this person who's seeking the truth, they're in on it. Or they're not an expert. Or they question their credentials. Anything. That is how they get through and keep disinformation spinning. They will target people who are advocating for factual information. And then finally, and this is the most important one, is they will play the long game. So you see that now. What we're seeing now is disinformation tactics that have been years in the making, just starting to kind of push through. So if you think about it from that, the world of 2020 is, in terms of disinformation, is going to look even worse in 2030 or 2035 or 2040 if we don't take active measures, if we don't take steps to safeguard and protect protect ourselves from this kind of information. And that directly ties in with organizational missions, because if in the realm of public affairs, where we have to put the factual information out, as soon as that information goes out there, it's under attack. It becomes a target for these channels. And it may not be directly attacked. It may be attacked from sideways. It may be attacked through proxies, anything like that. And so that kind of leads into, what can we do about it? How do we safeguard ourselves? How do we make sure that we are protecting the narrative that we are trying to push out to the American people? And it comes with every single social media platform that you run, every platform that you manage needs to have a unique value proposition. And broken down to its simplest terms, a UVP is what is going to make your platform unique in comparison to all other similar platforms. It's the ultimate why. And that goes to how it's constructed. You need to understand that why is a huge driver of how information is consumed and amplified on social media. So you need to really look at your platforms as, if I was a consumer of this information, would I look to this platform? Would I go to this page? Would I go to this Twitter account or this Instagram? And then why? Would I choose to engage with it? So as you're building a unique value proposition, you look at these different steps that we have on here. And the first is the headline. That's the ultimate why. Why are you doing this? Why is your organization on Facebook? Why is it on Twitter? What is the overall intent? And that could lead back to your boss or your commander's intent of what they want to accomplish in a digital space. So you identify the why in that headline, and then you drill it down. And you say, my sub-headline is how I'm going to actually do that. So I've said why I'm here. How am I going to communicate my commander's intent or my boss's vision? After that, you look at those 3 bullet points. And that is typically your what. Those are your boss's priorities, your commander's priorities. You have their intent, and then you say, I've got their priorities listed A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, however it's set up. And those are what you're going to rely on when you're developing content. Does the content you are developing somehow align to one of these priorities, one of these bullet points? Does it communicate to the overall why, to the overall reason that you're on this platform? And then last, you have a visual tie. That's kind of your brand. That is something that's going to easily identify your content. And it's not necessarily the blue check mark or anything like that says I'm an authentic page. It is a brand. It is an image, or if you're running a page for a senior leader, it's a person. It is something that someone's going to see and say, oh, that's their content. I get it. So all of this gets after the ultimate reason for being on social media, which is to communicate information in a fashion where your audience is going to align with it, is going to amplify it. And when you do that, you're already in a fight. And this right here is kind of what gets people really, really, really feeling defeated about social media interaction. And it's because your platforms out there, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, they all have an algorithm. And we're not going to spend time on each aspect of these algorithms because they're forever changing. Facebook just updated theirs in 2020. But what we're going to do is look at some of the commonalities. So we're going to take some time and look at the Facebook algorithm here. And a lot of what's in the Facebook algorithm we're seeing in other platforms as well. You have to understand, too, that the ultimate goal of these social media platforms is to keep the user, to keep you, to keep me on that platform as long as possible. It's to hold our attention there. The longer we're there, the more content we consume, the more interactions we have, the more exposure we have to advertising, to sponsored posts, to the money drivers of those platforms. So if you look at the Facebook algorithm on here, in the very center, you have conversation. That's a change from previous years. Facebook is now rewarding conversation above all other engagements. And the reason for that is if you are hanging on and commenting on a status, you're on the platform longer. So Facebook is going to automatically reward content that is not that has a large conversation associated with it. We look at that and kind of spiderwebbing out. If you go to the fringe elements on there, you see that it also rewards posts content that has emotive visuals. They reward posts where you have images attached to them that make you feel something. If you can, and that chalks up to stopping power. If you're scrolling on your timeline and you see a very, very emotive visual on there, you're going to stop. Now, the next step that people do is they read the status, and that's where identity politics comes into play. Facebook is rewarding content that has that aligns with people's values. That's why you see more of the things that you are engaging with. You see more things that you align with as a person. And so afterwards, you have social justice. Facebook rewards content that allows people to take action on it. And that action could be engagement. It could be likes. It could be comments, shares, any and all of that. It could be all of that stuff. Now, Facebook truly values that kind of engagement as well. But ultimately, it does track back to conversation. And then finally, kind of on the fringe there, they look at the typical interactions that you as a user have on there, and they apply that to content being pushed into the timelines. So if the content you push in there is of typical interaction, then it's going to resonate with the algorithm and be ranked higher. What that ultimately means is if your content breaks through and hits these parts of the Facebook algorithm, it will be more visible. And if it is more visible, then there's a likely chance that it's going to be able to reach your target audiences, reach your key publics out there. So it's kind of playing ball within their realm. And if you look at some of the other algorithms out there, you've got Twitter. Now, instead of conversation, Twitter values consistency at their center. They like people who are constantly tweeting. You could literally tweet every 15 minutes and not get ahead of their algorithm. So, and not only that, is Twitter is shifting away from a chronological algorithm to an interest-based one because they see the success of how that works when it comes to putting information out, revenue streams, all of that. So, but you see a lot of similar things from the Facebook algorithm as well. And another thing that people should kind of notice on here, and it's a common element with all of the algorithms from different platforms, is trust. Trust is a cornerstone of social media. Your user has to trust your content. They have to trust the platform on there. They have to trust who is communicating with them. And we're living in a kind of an age where people are less likely to trust faceless organizations, and they're more likely to trust strangers. So one of the challenges we face as public affairs professionals is how to sound like a human being on these platforms. We can sound very stoic and we can sound very robotic all the time. And it's really easy to do that. But it also detaches ourselves from our audience. Our audience doesn't feel like they're actually engaging a human being. They feel like they're talking to a robot or they're being talked at. And that makes it seem like they're listening to somebody standing on a soapbox, shouting out with a megaphone, "You need to pay attention to this. This is the information you need." Instead of being at a dinner party and you're just having a conversation with somebody where that other person sees your inputs as valuable or maybe engages back with them. And that's common, again, across other platforms as well. You see trust in the Instagram algorithm. Now, Instagram leverages photo quality as one of its highest attributes. It's a little different than emotive visuals because they're looking at the photo quality or the image quality as actually being something inspirational. People see that and they're like, wow, that's awesome. That is where they're deriving their stopping power from. And then less so much in conversations, more with compelling captions in there. What is that caption? What is that identity politic going to say to your audience? And then kind of we look as well YouTube, which is more has more characteristics of a search engine, but it still has a social element to it. YouTube's great for hanging longer video format content on there. And even though in 2020 Facebook said it's going to start rewarding longer form video, that's going to I feel that that's going to kind of go away after a while, because you're still seeing people devoting a lot more energy to engaging with short, snackable 10-second clips that resonate with them. But on YouTube, you're seeing people hang on for hours on end as they fall down a YouTube rabbit hole looking at a recipe of something or how to do something. So ultimately, you look at these algorithms and it's easy to say, okay, well, there's a lot of things going on here. So do I set up and do I play in this arena? And the reality is you have to. You can't really get to a point where you are ignoring social media, because so much is happening so fast on there. It's not a system that we can just step out of and look at passively. So ultimately, and we talked about this with Facebook, you drill down the algorithm and you get into making meaning over just making messages. And that comes back to that emotive visuals, identity politics, and social justice. That really gets after making a meaningful connection with your audience. And where that differs from social media of, say, 10 years ago to social media of today is that meaning has to be supported with conversation. It has to be augmented with that. Conversation is where you're going to see most of your narrative taking shape and seeing power behind it. So you have to look too, there's certain levels of engagement, and you think of where it's coming from. The initial level is observing, and that's most of the people on social media. They're just going to passively look. And it goes back to when you have comments. The more comments you have, the more passive observers you're going to have, because people tune in, wonder what they're talking about. The next level you've got is following. And that's when people are more encouraged to say, I want to see more of this content. I've seen a few posts from this page, or I've seen people that I know share this content. I'm going to give it a chance and follow it. I like some of their stuff. Next, you've got engaging. And so that's your limited interaction. That is simple clicks to expand an image, clicks to like or react to it, just basic level clicks. And it's similar to the next step up, which is endorsing, which is your reactions. Your likes and your comments are found there. They start to hang on there. But these are your surface level comments. They're really simple. They're just saying like, hey, great, or I like this, or I don't like this, stuff like that. Finally, the top level is contributing. So these are actual conversations people are having with your brand. They are asking questions, they're offering their opinions, whether it's good or bad, they're contributing to your content. And all that is doing is raising its visibility. So we often hear things like, don't feed the trolls. Well, don't feed the trolls unless you can get them to guard your bridge. We talked earlier about having a useful idiot. That works when you're putting factual information out as well, because inevitably you could get trolled. Now, is that troll useful to you? Possibly. If you get that troll to engage with you, even if it's in a slightly negative fashion, you're going to raise the visibility of your post. And you can also use that space with the troll engaging you to correct the record, to put out actual information that is going to let you have some kind of control over the narrative. Instead of the traditional way is to say, oh, I'm going to ignore them. But all that does is encourage that troll to invite other trolls, and then the narrative starts to spin out of control. So when we put all this together, we come down to how are we able to create a solid defense against misinformation, disinformation, malinformation along our networks. And I've heard kind of conversations saying, oh, we should be going out into the information space and as official platforms and correcting the record on stories that we see that impact us. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good idea to kind of keep an eye on that stuff. But before anybody goes out into that space, it's a good idea to have your own space, your own social media networks and platforms defended. And that comes down into this matrix right here on how to combat disinformation. At the center, you have a unique value proposition. You have the core of what is what your social media is about, why you're here. Around it, right at the top, you have trust. That is where I talked about you have to engender trust among your audience. You have to make them feel like you are invested in them so they invest in you. Individually consider those comments that you're getting. Engage with them as people. If somebody was at a party with you and they were talking with you, you wouldn't necessarily just listen and then walk away. I mean, you might, but that person probably wouldn't talk with you again. So treat them like valued contributors on your platform. Next up, you have going to the left, you have digital literacy. And that kind of got back into the commandments of fake news. It really talks about elevating our education on what is true and what is false. And that is conversations that you can have with your teams, with the people in your organization. Like, what are the components of fake news, of disinformation? How do you spot disinformation actors? There's actually 4 steps to spotting a disinformation actors, or four criteria that you should kind of keep in mind. Those bots, trolls, and sock puppets that I mentioned, they follow patterns. In fact, it gets so bad sometimes with how much they're flooding the information environment, they sometimes copy and paste comments or status updates. So when you see that, call it out. Make sure your friends, your peers, your coworkers know how to identify that. Because if we're exposed to fake news as consumers of the information, we need to make sure that we're safeguarded against buying into it. And so another kind of step to identifying or raising your digital literacy is understanding that a lot of these bots, trolls, and sock puppets or fake pages, they're not old. They haven't been around for years and years, especially as social media is moving to combat this. So the age of the page or the age of those accounts matters. If you have somebody who looks like they're maybe 50 years old on a Facebook profile, but their account started up last week, might throw up a red flag or two. Also look at the way they share the content. Are they just commenting on news sources? Are they sharing stuff on their timelines? Are there personal updates on their timelines? As you do a little bit of face stalking with that or kind of profile stalking, but really and truly, if all they're doing is sowing discord, is that somebody that you want to align with or you want to encourage people to align with? And then another thing is looking at common terms and kind of their overall sentiment. Disinformation focuses and relies on stoking outrage. So if you see these accounts out there, you see these people out there, all they're doing is stoking outrage or posting shocking content and saying things, oh, this is unbelievable. I can't believe this. This is outrageous. If that's their constant default and go-to, it's another red flag on there. So looking at all of that stuff raises your ability to understand this digital environment, this battle space that we're in. And it actually is a battle space because we're seeing tangible actions coming from this kind of information space. Next on the list here, you have fostering conversation. And that's truly important. We used to kind of go by the rule of if you put content out, you click publish and you're good. That's all you have to do. You've put the information out, job done, move on to the next thing. But what we're noticing is these bad actors, these trolls, these sock puppets, these bots, they're hanging on and waiting to hijack a narrative in the comments. They're waiting to shift it. So you could have the best story in the world that media has done about your organization, and they put it on their social media account, and then you're wondering why you're getting negative feedback on yours. Take a look at their story and see if the narrative has been hijacked in the comments. Be able to defend your own narrative on your own content with that happening. Foster meaningful conversations, because those bots, trolls, and sock puppets, what they're doing is they're putting that information out and moving on. Very rarely will they have the bandwidth to engage in a conversation because they have to move on to the next target and the next target. It's all about saturating the information environment. So if you are able to foster that conversation, they can't stay. They can't stay to keep up with it. And even if they have a troll that is staying on, or even if there is a troll who is going to stay on and battle with you, again, all it's doing is raising your visibility. So you get to direct how that conversation goes. Below that, you've got creating emotions. You want to create meaningful and positive emotions on there, especially when you have a sea of negativity out there. If you are a positive influence on there, people will hang on to those emotion, to that content more than they would if it was negative, because it makes them feel better about things. And that leads up to having dynamic content. I have very few hard, fast rules on social media, but one of them is I never share PowerPoint. PowerPoint is a social media killer. And that kind of expands out to poor content is a social media killer. And I don't mean poor content in the sense of things like memes, because memes are actually valuable. And I know there's debate on whether or not to use memes. I'll kind of leave you with a thought on memes, which is our adversaries are using them. And our adversaries are using them better than we're using them, because we're having a debate on whether or not we should use them. So when you consider getting your message out there, memes are dynamic content, and memes are low quality. That's part of their nature. That's part of their appeal. And they're easy to do, easy to rapidly produce. So if you look at that stuff, your content needs to be dynamic in the sense that it resonates with your audience. And that may not be a 10-minute video that is super high production quality. It could be a meme that takes 10 seconds to create, maybe a little longer, depending on what program you're using. So look at it that way. And then finally, you come up to a sharing economy. Our organizations don't exist in a vacuum. We have other same level or peer organizations out there that really and truly are putting out information that we could amplify, we could share, we could comment on, we could add to the discussion. All of that. We're not very good at playing within that network in a positive way with one another. So look at your organizations that are similar and say, how can I support them? Can I share their content on my platform? Can I add the trust capital that I've engendered with my audience to theirs? If you can, do it. All that does is raise the overall visibility, the overall value of that content, and it shows people multiple options for factual information that's out there. So kind of wrapping that up, we look at this information space is incredibly dynamic, and it's incredibly difficult to navigate when you don't come at it with a strategic mindset. So it kind of comes back to, not only do we have to have a social media strategy that we put out and we make it our own, we make it unique. We also have to have a comment strategy. We have to have a conversation strategy. And the way to do that is to look at the end state. What do you want to achieve? What are the outcomes that you want to achieve with the content that you are putting out? That's your end state. And then you track it backward and you say, okay, that's my end state. My starting state is with the content when I click publish. In between there are three roads. There's the road that you want to take. That's the conversation you want to have about this, the ideal conversation. There's the road that you don't want to take, and that is where it completely goes awry, and you don't want to talk about the stuff that people are trying to talk about. And then there's the middle road, which is likely where you'll end up, which is the conversation you're likely going to have, where you have some positivity, some negativity, some trolls, some supporters. So having that thought through is incredibly, incredibly valuable when you're developing that content. When you are looking at disinformation and you're looking at social media as a battle space. And truth be told, it is not a traditional battle space. Social media is gray zone. It doesn't rise to the standard of conventional warfare. It's asymmetric. At any given moment, you could have an advocate or an ally on some content, and they turn and they are an enemy on the next. It makes this a very, very difficult place to navigate, which is why that combating disinformation matrix is very important. Because as you go out there and you're correcting the record and you're pushing out your truthful and factual narratives, you have to be aware that that network is going to be attacked. It's going to be attacked by bad state actors, by normal people who are just angry. So you have to have a solid defense of that. And having that with a network of other organizations that are supportive is very, very, very important when dealing with social media in a narrative space or in a disinformation space. You look at that. the more disinformation that you see as you start looking on your personal timelines, that's chalked up to one of the components of disinformation is to muddle the truth, is to say, well, what is true anymore? How do you determine fact from fiction? Nothing's true. And so when people feel that lack of control, they reach out. They reach out to anything that's going to align to a value they have. So that's where disinformation comes into play. That's where memes come into play. They see a meme out there that makes them feel a certain way, and they're like, I'm going to amplify this. This aligns with what I believe in, so I need to push that out there. And it makes it very hard when you are trying to put out factual information that is traditionally generated, that has high quality images, and it has a very, very thought through story construction. And you put it out there and you're like, well, why is nobody engaging with this? Well, they're too busy amplifying stuff that just makes them feel a certain way in the moment. So when you build that content, you have to look at, how do I create that emotion? What is the emotion that I want to attach to this content? Do I want people to feel inspired? Do I want them to feel upset by something? Do I want them to feel emboldened to act on something? What is the outcome of this content? And then the most important thing about all of this is teaching your teams, is educating your people, making sure that your most junior ranking person in that office understands the intent, understands the strategic vision of social media, of your commander, of your boss. Everybody is on the same page with it. Everyone can have impactful and meaningful discussions when it comes to social media and disinformation. So with that, I kind of want to pull back, and I know this is going to get broadcast out, but I'm happy to take any questions that are coming through in there and kind of answer them in the platform. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the summit, and thank you again for tuning in to World War Web.